You want to share the other screen, right?
All right, so pleasant welcome, good evening, good morning, wherever you are joining us in the world. This evening for Jamaica, a warm welcome to this inaugural workshop series by Chosen to Glow Ministries and the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society. I am Dr. Sarah Buckland. I'm representing Chosen to Glow Ministries. I'll be your host for today. So thanks for all who took the time to join here on Zoom. If you're also, we're also streaming online via YouTube at Chosen to Glow Ministries and on Facebook. So today's session is really the first of an 8-part series, weekly series under the 2023 Defend It Well Mentorship Program. And really the purpose of what we're here today is to just help to strengthen the faith, both of those who doubt or those who are also believers who want to basically be more effective in their outreach. All right. So as you would have seen in our flyer today, we start with a very important topic. Is Genesis fantasy? Can a true scientist believe the Bible? So these are very topical questions that, you know, some persons actually it's a hindrance to some persons from believing the Bible. So because one has to ask, if we cannot trust, you know, that first book of the Bible, why should we trust anything else that it claims? All right, so we do have a theme scripture for our weekly webinars, and this week's scripture is from John 3 verse 12, where Jesus says, I have spoken to you of earthly things and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? So to help us apply this scripture, we have some very special guests with us today. We have Dr. Wayne West, who is a medical doctor and a radiologist, as well as he chairs the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society. We also have Professor Mark Armitage, who is a microscopist, and he is an expert in dinosaur tissues examination. We also have Dr. Sarfati, who is also scheduled for another session, but he might or might not, you know, just put in a little word here today as well. As a bonus, in addition to the presentations, we will be launching our social media competition where you can get opportunities to win great prizes. So stay tuned so you can hear further. All right, so before we go any further, we will ask Minister Joseph Buckland to lead us with an opening prayer, please. Thank you.
Let us go to God in prayer. Blessed are you, O Lord God, the creator of the universe and the Lord of heaven and earth. We are grateful that you love us, that you have revealed yourself to us, that you have made known who you are and what your will is in the things that you have made and in the revelations that are written in the Bible, and especially in the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us, revealing your glory among human beings, your Son, Jesus. We pray, dear Father, that you may be with all the presenters, and we pray that you will be with us, those who are listening and participating, that we will truly learn a lot from these scientists and these Christians who have gone ahead of us to do a lot of research on these important matters. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen.
Ben.
Right. So thank you. Thank you so much. So by way of reminding our audience, please ensure that your mics are muted through the presentations, but do feel free to type your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we will have separate question and answer segments after each presentation. So we will try to get to all of your questions. So do feel free to type them until after the presentation you can open your mics. All right, so now into our topic. Our first session for today will be led by Dr. Wayne West, who will focus on the topic of comparing Genesis and evolutionary theory. Basically, what does science say about our reality? What does the Bible say about our reality? Is the belief in 6 days of creation rational? Hasn't the science of evolution disproven it? So before he joins us, let me just bring up his bio, a brief biography of Dr. West, so that you can know a bit more about speaking, his scientific background, and otherwise. So as mentioned before, Dr. West is a medical doctor and a consultant radiologist at the University Hospital of the West Indies, Mona. He's also a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Medical Sciences, UWI Mona, with peer-reviewed publications in Caribbean and international journals. He is a former head of the Department of Radiology and supervisor of the Doctor of Medicine postgraduate program in radiology at the University Hospital of the West Indies and UWI. And he's also the former president of the Jamaica Association of Radiologists. In his NGO life, he is the chairman of the Jamaica Coalition of a Healthy Society, which is a non-governmental organization that advocates for the Judeo-Christian worldview for law and public policy in Jamaica. He also chairs the Issachar Foundation and organizes lectures to review laws and public policies from the Judeo-Christian worldview. Wears so many hats. He's also vice president of the Jamaica Cause, an NGO that mobilizes the church for the defense of the Judeo-Christian worldview for law and public policy in Jamaica. He's the president of Caribbean Cause, an NGO that advocates and mobilizes the church for the defense of Judeo-Christian worldview for law and public policy. He's also a former deacon in the Mona Open Bible Church and superintendent of the Mona Sunday School Department. He's married to Dr. Doreen for 42 years, I think it was. So I had an old thing that, so you can always correct me if I've gotten the figure wrong. They have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. So without further ado, I will welcome Dr. West once again. Do you have the presentation or do I have to?
Okay, I tell you, I have it, but maybe I can let you share screen and I'll just say next slide, next slide, next slide. Okay, all right. My wife suggested to me that I just share it. All right, let me try and see if I can just share it. All right, share. Okay, and let me see. And slideshow, play from the start. Can everybody see it?
Yes, we can.
Everybody can see it now? All right.
Yes.
So I should just add that I just recently retired in September, so I'm no longer at UW. I am recently retired. And let me just say, I am an advocate for public policy. So I'm going to present this as a political advocate would present this information, okay? Because the objective, whenever I do these things, I use a sort of what I call applied. The objective is to refute these things in the public square for political reasons. I don't distinguish, all right? So that is the context in which I'm going to be doing this presentation. All right, so it's Genesis versus evolutionary science, or why evolution fails to remove God. And I just want to say that this is very important that we understand that we are not in conflict with science. We are in a bitter conflict with persons who hold a materialist atheist worldview that there is no God. And the materialist atheist worldview is important in that it's presented as being the worldview of the intelligent people of the world, the scientific persons, and that religion, especially Christianity, is the worldview of the unintelligent people who believe myths from the Bronze Age. And that categorization is important in order to impact decision makers. The materialist atheist worldview wishes to free human beings from divine control. So it's important when we discuss these things that we realize again that we are not against science. Science is not the problem. There are people who want to get rid of God, and they are trying to use propaganda using science to achieve that. All right. So as we go into the discussion, Genesis, evolution. I'm going to kind of break it up into 4 areas, just to say what evolution is and to say why abiogenesis, thermodynamics, and special relativity make the efforts of people who use evolution to remove God futile. All right, so just to repeat, we would break it up into 4 parts, discuss evolution, and then bring in abiogenesis, thermodynamics, and special relativity to show why the objective of the persons who are using evolution to remove God is futile. So evolution is a theory in biology postulating that the various types of plants, animals, and other living things on Earth have their origin in other pre-existing types, and that the distinguishable differences are due to modifications in successive generations. They call this descent with modification. The theory of evolution is one of the fundamental keystones of modern biological theory. All right. So I am going to put God in front of the theory of evolution, and God is underlined because the objective, as I said, is that the people with the worldview that is advancing evolution want to say God does not exist. But the first thing we're going to show is that in order for evolution to occur, you need God. Why is that so? Let's see. What is required for evolution to occur? You need something to build the organism. This is a part of the organism because we are not being chiseled from the outside. And you also need a database and changes to the database which can be stored in. So you need a code which tells you how to build the organism. You need infrastructure to use the code. And you need nanotechnology using micro machines to build the body of the organism. And you need to have an integrated systems of control and sensors to determine feedback and so on in order to build that organism properly. In fact, a gentleman by the name of John von Neumann, sometime in the 1940s, he was a brilliant mathematician, I think a Hungarian, recognized that in order for you to achieve evolution, you had to have something called a universal constructor, which would build the body of the organism. You had to have inputs, which would be the material, the food, etc., the organic material, and to produce the output, which is the organism. But you had to have a memory of what the organism should look like, and you had to have control unit. So you immediately are looking at infrastructure that requires intelligence to achieve evolution. Now, the people who talk about evolution wouldn't say that. And this is an example. This is Lassie. I mean, those of us who were young in the 60s used to look at Lassie. And this is the dog Lassie, a collie. And this is Lassie in 2005. Of course, this is not the same Lassie. What happened is that this Lassie in 2005 was built from the instructions, which were identical or very similar, really, to the previous Lassie of the 1960s, 1950s. Now, we move into one aspect of the information required to produce an organism. And what we have is the DNA code. And here we have, the DNA code is to be distinguished from the DNA molecule, where we have in the code, we have 3 bases, like this one is thymine, 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 and they are symbols for particular amino acids, which is phenylalanine, or for example, thymine, thymine, okay? Right. An amino acid is what is used to build the proteins. And amino acids have we'll develop that a little bit more. Amino acids have particular properties and they influence the shape of the protein, which in turn influence its behavior. But we can see that this code, and it is a code because one set of objects, these are the bases of the DNA molecule, are used as symbols for amino acids, which are completely different structures. And there is no chemical reaction linking these 2 things. They are symbols. That's why this is a code. All right, this amino acid is serine. This is thymine, cytosine, thymine. Or if we go down here, this is tyrosine. That is, you see, the different tree-based codons. All right. So this is the DNA code. Again, evolution cannot occur without infrastructure provided by an intelligent being. That is God. So people may talk about evolution all they want, but they must also speak about the infrastructure required to achieve. And as we saw in the universal constructor, you need some serious, basically computer-like infrastructure, which combined with information processing and instructions for building the body. So that's one thing. There are other issues with evolution. There are issues of form, the form of organism. You know, there's a reference to the Cambrian explosion, which occurred a long time ago. But now there are less forms nowadays, in today's day, than there were in the past. Evolution really should give you more forms as you go from past to present. But we have less forms than we had in the Cambrian explosion. Also, Darwin's theory of evolution and Darwin and scientific theories must be falsifiable. Their prediction, they must make predictions, and those predictions must be able to be shown to be false. But Darwin made predictions. He said that, you know, evolution would take place gradually. So you would see gradual changes in the fossil record. But the fossil record does not support gradualism. The fossil record supports stasis. So what you have is new organisms are formed, they remain for a while, and they become extinct. So they created this other concept of evolution called punctuated equilibrium, where you get these changes. So you have one set of organisms, and then you get a change to a whole new set of organisms who become extinct. So that's one challenge, another challenge. A third challenge to evolutionary theory is form and the genome. And the fact of the matter is both cells, the genome is really your DNA, you know, all the DNA in your body, that's the genome. And this same DNA can produce different types of cells, different types of organs, different types of body plan, and even different DNA can produce the same body plan. So let's take a look at some of these things. We're talking about form, okay? Like for example, the same DNA can produce a red blood cell that looks like that, columnar epithelium that looks like this, a bone cell that looks like that, a sperm cell that looks like that, etc., the egg that looks like that. All of these are produced by the same DNA. How and why? Or we can have organs that look like this. This is the lung, okay? These are the kidneys, this is the brain, this is the liver. All of these different organs with different forms are being produced by the same DNA. Or completely different body plan. And a butterfly, completely different body plan for the two of them. And they are produced by the same DNA, all right? And here we have two muscles. This is called modiolus. And the thing about it is that these have completely different genetic material, but they look almost the same. So in fact, a scientist by the name of Emma Vodotti, she looked at modiolus. This is what we call the common horse mussel, found in the Atlantic and on the west coast of Sweden. They turn out to be totally different genetically from the one found in the Pacific coast of the US, despite looking identical. And that presents a problem because Darwin's theory is the evolution of species. And he determines species by observation, by looking at them. But here we have modiolus, which looks identical. Well, they call them the same name, but they looked identical. But when they examined their genetic makeup, they were completely different. So some scientists at least have recognized that the modern synthesis, which is MS, which is the theory that describes evolution, is strictly a theory of genes. Because the modern synthesis say you get random changes in the genes followed by natural selection. And that is the reason why we get all these different living organisms. Yet the phenomenon that has to be explained in evolution is the transmutation of form. Okay? And that meaning how forms change from one into the other. And so scientists have come to realize a number of things that we're not going to read all of them. I'm going to highlight the 5 things, which is number 6 in the problems related to evolutionary theory. The question is, how do novel phenotypes, in other words, body plans, arise? There is no answer to that question. At present, as we speak, there is no answer to the question. If you claim that evolution occurs and that bacteria or whatever become human beings, what is the mechanism by that is achieved? And like I said, the fifth problem with evolution is that there is no answer to that question. So the question of how do novel phenotypes arise and do they represent a distinct class of phenotypic change is a question that evolutionary science today does not answer. And they have moved from what is called the modern synthesis, which was accepted sometime in the 1950s, referred to that the changes that all these organisms went to become new organisms was random mutation, natural selection. Well, that is rejected as just cannot work now. So they put in all of these possibilities together, Evo, Devo, that is evolution, development and evolution, genomics, network, complicity theory, epicentric inheritance, plasticity accommodation. All of these things are suggestions. The fact of the matter is nobody knows how organisms can evolve. And this comes from a book, well, first of all, initially a paper written by a gentleman we'll show you in a short while. His name is, it came from this paper which was published in 2009, and it is called An Extended Synthesis for Evolutionary Biology. So we had the modern synthesis, just to repeat, which was supposed to be random mutation and natural selection giving rise to new organs and body plan. Well, Massimo Piligucci, I hope I pronounce his name, Piligucci, I hope I pronounce his name properly. He postulated all those things that we saw, and himself and other philosophers of science got together to write a book, this book called Evolution, the Extended Synthesis. All of this is grasping at straws, all right? They are grasping at straws. They believe that evolution is true. They have to, because if you believe it is this, it's supposed, as Richard Dawkins says, to give the intellectual foundation for rejecting God. So you must grasping at straws. This evolution, the extended synthesis, was written sometime in 2010, the MIT Press. And there was another similar thing which was published by some evolutionary biologists who met in London, I think in 2015. The simple fact is they do not know how evolution can produce new organs and body plans. The ground on which evolution fails is the E. coli experiment. There's an experiment which was started by a gentleman called Richard Lynx at Michigan State University. And that was started way back in 1988, okay? Lynx performed the 10,000 transfer of the experiment on March 2017. And the population reached over 73,000 generations in early 2020. So in 2020, E. coli, which is a bacteria, okay, I think it's a bacteria which usually live in your gut. He took 12 batches of these bacteria and took them through up to, like I say, 2020, 73,000 generations to see what evolutionary change would occur. You know, the way evolutionists hide behind not seeing anything at all is saying that, look, it takes such a long time, this is deep time, so you can't really see it. So, but he took bacteria, and bacteria have a very short lifespan, so you can get many generations. In fact, at one time I had calculated that if the bacteria were human beings, the number of generations would have corresponded to approximately 2.8 million years. And all that occurred is minor occurred. Well, first of all, the bottom line is all the E. coli, the bacteria remain bacteria. None of them change into anything else. They didn't develop any new organs or any new body plan. There was some change in their biochemistry in that some of them could now metabolize citrate, which they couldn't do before, but that was just a variation of an enzyme that actually existed before. And there were some other minor changes, but there was no change. E. coli remained E. coli, so no new species whatever. The next thing, there were number 8 to show why evolution is a failure. Some experiments were carried out on the fruit fly. And this little article that I'm reading here came, I think, from the Creation Science, I believe. Anyway, I missed. It says, if evolutionary biologists could document such evolution in action, which is where you could actually see new organs and body plans being formed, they would vindicate their worldview and cite real research to support their surreal claims. In 1980, this search for proof led researchers to painstakingly and purposefully mutate each cord gene involved in fruit fly development. The now classic work, for which the authors won the Nobel Prize in 1995, was published in Nature, one of the most significant journals. Okay, the experiment proved that the mutation of any of these cord developmental genes, mutations that would be essential for the fly to evolve into any other creature, merely resulted in dead or deformed fly. This therefore shows that fruit flies could not evolve. So the E. coli experiment showed that E. coli, that the fruit fly they cannot evolve. And this is the paper in Nature here. These guys want to know that. The fact of the matter is, the necessary and sufficient proof of evolution is scientifically verified proof that new organs and body plans can be produced solely by the laws of physics, because a designer can produce organisms with any feature. So if evolution is true, the people who are advocating it, and I call them evolution myth believers, just to repeat that, I call them evolution myth believers. They have to present this proof. And I can tell you that I have been on the internet for over 10 years with people like Jerry Coyne for the University of Chicago, because he has a blog called Why Evolution is True. And none of them can answer this question because it is not in the scientific literature. And you can stand on that. But there are other reasons why we can reject evolution. As I said, the first one is that you need God for the infrastructure for evolution. And as we go along, we show that there is no proof of any mechanism that can produce evolution. Well, the other thing is life itself, okay? When you look at life, abiogenesis, you can't have life without God, because life is information. When you look at the characteristics of life, you're looking at information processing, feedback controls, nanotechnology, engineering, artistry. You cannot get that without an intelligence, okay? Look, we're gonna just focus on the information processing, the code, the DNA code. As we said, the code is to be distinguished from the DNA molecule. In the DNA code, codons made of 3 bases of DNA molecule act as symbol for each of the 20 amino acids, which we spoke about before. And that the amino acids have different chemical properties and shapes, and these different properties and shape determine the shape and function of the protein. For example, in sickle cell, if one has sickle cell disease, a change in just one of those amino acids, I think at position 6, my wife is a hematologist to correct me on that. If you change that amino acid at position 6, the protein, which is composed of thousands of amino acids, doesn't function properly. That is the kind of control and the accuracy that you must have in producing these things. So this is the molecule, which is the double helix, the DNA. And this says guanine, cytosine, adenine, thymine, etc. These are the bases where they thing there in the double helix. But as we showed before, this is the code, which is related to the 3 bases being code symbols for an amino acid. Completely different concept. And this is just to show you some of the properties of these amino acids that are so important for constructing the protein chain. So you have hydrophobic, those who love water, those that hate water, those that love water, hydrophilic, and there are also those that love fat and this sort of thing. But the point to be made that the amino acids are very specific. They must be very specific, okay? So this is the molecule versus the codon. This is a slam dunk. There is no mechanism by which a code can be produced, but by an intellect making free will choices to say this symbol represents that. Now the secularists won't accept it, but they have no way around it. They will do any and everything to reject it, but there's no way around it. It's a slam dunk. Okay. This is why I say Western secularists cannot allow themselves to be distinguished between the DNA molecule, the double helix on the left, which is this, which is produced by chemical bonds, and the DNA code, which involves no chemical interaction, but rather is a result of free will choices of the creator. Acknowledging the code destroys their worldview. And I said, I've been on the internet for 10 years making this point, and they will go round and round because they don't want to accept it, and you can't force people to accept it, but there's nothing they can do about it. It is just a fact. All right. The 10th, which is the second to last consideration as to why creation is important and why evolution is really cannot be bunkered, is because of thermodynamics. And it's important, it's interesting that both evolution, thermodynamics, and the last thing I'm coming to, which is special relativity, all came out not around the same time, but close to each other. So thermodynamics really says that there are 4 considerations in thermodynamics, but we're only going to spend time on 2, the first and second law. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy can be converted from one form to another with the interaction of heat, work, internal energy, but it cannot be created or destroyed under any circumstances. Simply said, the amount of universe in a closed system, we assume the universe is a closed system, is fixed and cannot be changed. It can be converted into other form. The second law of thermodynamics states that the state of entropy, which is disorder of the entire universe as an isolated system, will always increase over time. The second law also states that changes in entropy in the universe can never be negative. And to convert that, the second law of thermodynamics tells us that when we do something, we use energy. So if I am walking up the step, I use energy. If I am fixing my car, I use energy, etc. But every time you do some useful work, you also produce heat, and heat produces increase in disorder in the universe. So it's telling us that there has to be, if we still have useful energy in the universe cannot be infinitely old. All right? The universe cannot be infinitely old. If it were infinitely old, it would not have any energy available to do useful work. So in time, the universe is going to become dead. That's what the cosmologists and they predict. Because all the energy that could be used to do useful work would have been dissipated into entropy, meaning disorder. But the fact that the universe can still do useful work shows that it is not eternal. Now, the Bible has been saying for thousands of years that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right, the Bible has been saying that the universe had a beginning for thousands of years. But it is only in the late 1800s and the early 1900s that this fact came to be accepted by the scientific community in the form of thermodynamics and of course also in the form of the Big Bang Theory, which we won't go into here. So the Bible was right all along. If people had said, no, the universe was eternal as the scientists would have liked it for, we would be wrong. I just want to say that science is the study of the natural world. It's a work in progress. It gives us answers about what is and why it is, what things are made of, and how they function. But it does not give us information about who made it, why it was made, and its purpose. The last thing I want to show you that evolution is inconsistent, because evolution is the concept, not only that organisms change formula. It's important to realize that evolution also says there is no God. So it's not simply a matter of organism changing form. What the objective of evolutionary theory is to say there is no God. And the Bible gives us a different perspective.
Where Einstein comes in. So Albert Einstein, his first thought experiment was as a 16-year-old. So he says, what would happen if he ran at the speed of light? According to relativity, then he should see a stationary beam, because relativity says that if you're moving at the speed of light, then you would see that light as stationary. It should not be moving. But Maxwell's equation said nobody ever sees the speed of light as stationary. The speed of light is always this constant. So there was a discrepancy. How was Einstein going to deal with this discrepancy? To do that, he did a second thought experiment. And in this experiment, he said, look, if people in a train are traveling at, let's say, four-fifths the speed of light, and somebody who was standing was stationary, so they had zero speed relative to the speed of light, let's just say, and a lightning bolt struck a tree, what speed would they measure the speed of light to be? And based on, of course, because we know that speed is distance divided by time, it was taught because of Maxwell's equations, which show that light always moves at the speed in a vacuum. It's never stationary. It was thought that the speed of light is going to be constant for all observers, but that went against relativity, which relativity said that the speed would depend on how you're moving relative to each other or to a particular source. So that needed to be we are in an entity.
Okay, so Einstein had to resolve why it is, according to Maxwell theory, the speed of light in a vacuum was a constant and a certain amount which was confirmed by experiment and which was shown by experiment not to change. How could that be when relativity as we understand it, if a car is coming towards us at 60 miles an hour and we are going towards it at 40 miles an hour, then we are coming to get at 100 miles an hour. Well, Einstein eventually made a bold step and said, you know what's happening here? Since the speed, I'm going to assume the speed of light is constant, and I'm going to assume that everybody, experience reality in a constant way. The laws of physics are constant. And because of that, he came up, my apologies, he came up with special relativity, which basically said that the speed of light is a constant, space and time are related, and space and time change. That led his mathematics professor, a fellow gentleman by the name of Minkowski, to say that, our reality is a fixed entity called the block universe. And rather than something like this, which we believe we are experiencing, is an unfolding universe. And so special relativity implied that the creation is a completed universe called a block universe. This is what's implied. And special relativity is a pretty solid theory. Now, again, we're not putting all our confidence in science. What we are saying is the fact of the matter is present scientific orthodoxy says that the universe looks like this. And if the universe looked like this, then evolution could not be a random, let me go back to this. Revolution cannot be a random, undirected process that doesn't require God, because it is saying that all organisms are already existing in this block universe. For that to occur, you need God to have made a block universe. And this is another depiction of the block universe, which says that all time and all space is in here. This may be where we are at, but this may be where we are at. But the fact is, everything is supposed to be in here. This is the postulate of the block universe. And I argue that if the universe is indeed a block, then this and this may well have been assembled in 6 days by God. That's open for discussion, but that's my consideration. If the universe looks like this, it was this that God created in 6 days. So to wrap up, we are faced with anti-biblical propaganda by people who have another worldview. They don't have the science on their side. And the people involved in that propaganda include the media, universities, schools, the entertainment industry, etc. They will speak about evolution often and always, leaving out the detail that evolution needs infrastructure that requires an intelligent being. They will suppress discussion on the shortcomings of evolution, like intelligence in design and the DNA code, and they will suppress information and discussion on things like the block universe or thermodynamics, which show that the universe had to have a beginning, must have been created by somebody, we say God, or that the block universe, if it is indeed true, as Einstein's theory seems to be true, then there could have been no random creation of organisms. They would have all been created by God and put in the block universe. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you understood. Any questions? Hello?
Sorry
Hello?
for the delay. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. West. Thank you so much. You covered so much in your presentation. Yes, I was trying to also let those who are, like 8 years old, to simplify what you were saying, but we also have our university students here and budding scientists. So it's very important that we have the technical information as well. So we are now in the question and answer segment. So any of you who have any questions, feel free to open your mics or put your questions in the chat for Dr. West. For anything that you might not have understood, anything that you thought was interesting or you wanted to deal with a bit more in detail. But I will start until, let me see if anybody has their hand up yet.
May I just add one thing?
Sure.
I just want to add one thing. You know, the theory of evolution is based on a biblical consideration. The only truth in the theory of evolution is the biblical fact that the Bible says God made living organisms according to their kind. So if you examine living organisms, you will find that they fall into groups of kind, like they are cats, they are dogs, they are whatever, sharks. The other part of the theory of evolution, so that's the only part that is true. You will find those things that organisms are related. The other part of the theory of evolution, which claims that organisms are formed by natural processes. There are processes that you can form a new organ or a new body plan by some natural process. There is absolutely no scientific evidence to support that. None whatsoever. So this is why I say it's a scam. It's a big scam.
It was very interesting. Sharon Edwards has her hand, but I just wanted to also, for those who probably missed it, that fruit fly experiment was very amusing to me because they're keeping these fruit flies trying to see if they're going to mutate over time and change into something else. And then they died instead of changing.
Well, what they actually did, they radiated them to try and get the mutations. And all the mutations they produce end up with dead or deformed flies.
So instead of improving, like how we see the evolutionary story, each stage, it has some type of improvement in terms of a new part, a new, capability. We see actually the opposite happening when we see mutations in the lab. So what we can actually observe, because in science, we look at observation as being like a hallmark of science. What we actually observe.
Yeah, God is great in that he designed organisms to adapt so that, there's a range for some changes to result in improvement. Those are few and far between. And they never change and become something else. And in fact, some of the things that they use to claim evolution, such as the bills of the finches, the beaks of the finches, are really just due to gene regulation and control. Those are built in to do those things according to the weather condition.
Okay, that's very, very good. And I think it's very important. I'm getting to you, Sharon. It's very important that for those who might have read in your textbooks, for example, about evolution being observed, like you mentioned about the finches, where Darwin saw these smaller beaks and then you have the bigger beaks. Sometimes scientists interchange the use of the word evolution. They use it in different ways. And they only describe what they see in terms of, size changes. If you have some turtles in an isolated area, you might have them over time based on the food supply and other conditions and becoming big. You might have got gigantism, for example, and then some of these changes are seasonal, but then they use that observation to try and what we call extrapolate, to say that because we see these small changes, that means that you move from one species to the other. But is there a difference then in the term? What should we look out for when a scientist say, yes, we have observed evolution? What has been observed as evolution? What has not been observed as evolution?
Let me just repeat. Evolution is a scam. It is an attempt to fool people. When Darwin wrote his book, it was called The Origin of Species. In other words, how new, and he was looking at organisms. He didn't have any genetic material. The genome wasn't discovered until now. And he looked at organisms and assumed that they change. And the reason for their change, he described. And classically, like I said, the finches, beaks, the changes that occurred are still taught as one of the icons of evolution. It's not evolution, because evolution must mean the creation of new genetic information to produce a new organ or a new body plan. There is absolutely no evidence that that can occur or has ever occurred. Nobody has ever documented that anyway. So evolution such as described as such has never been confirmed at all. So based on the fact that these guys cannot produce that sort of evidence, they have started using any change, whether it's a little, you know, you get something and you get an albino or something, instead of the normal melanin production, and call that evolution. So now every change is called evolution. And that
so it's like a trick. It's like a trick in the mind. They say what they see.
It's sleight of hand. Because if you all of, just as these people call women, it's the same principle, you know, the scam. That woman, anybody who identifies as a woman is a woman. If you follow their language, they use language to lie. Okay? So Darwin started saying evolution, the production of new organs and body plan, new species is evolution. Now, any little change is also evolution. So if you walk along with that and say, yes, this is evolution, then you are playing on the pitch that they have set. So you never call it evolution, you call it adaptation, because that's what it is. Because the E. coli, for example, have shown adaptation, but they have not evolved into anything different from E. coli.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing Dr. Sarfati is placing some links in the chat. It's something called bait and switch. So they're baiting you with what they see and call it evolution, and they switch what they mean after that, making it seem like it is the same thing because we see this on this small scale. That means that monkeys turned into people. No. So you can look at those links, and we'll go to Sharon and anybody else who had their hand up. I'm not seeing her. Sharon is still there? Or do you still have a
Yes,
Great.
I was just asking, thank you, Dr. West, for that informative presentation, but can you explain what you meant by transmutation of form, please?
Well, change of form. So for example, if the E. coli are bacteria, so they actually look like a kind of a tablet. Okay, let us say the E. coli look like a capsule, a tablet in the form of a capsule. Or let me make it a little more difficult. Transmutation means change in the shape of the body. Okay, let's say for example, and so you know what a tiger looks like. You've seen a tiger?
Yes.
All right. You know, if that tiger were to change and become like me, get my body plan, that's a transmutation. All right. We're saying that there is nowhere, anywhere in the scientific literature that confirms that such a thing happens. It's just not there. And for evolution to be true, you basically have to start with something small like a bacteria, and it must change and become a man and become a tiger, become a snake. And there's no record that those things can happen. There's no process that can make those things happen. It does not exist in the scientific literature.
Thank you, Dr. West.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. West. So I see Kelsey has a question in the chat about what about antibiotic resistance? Is that adaptation? And we see that Dr. Sarfati said adaptation, yes, evolution, no. But if any of you wanted to elaborate, Dr. West or Dr. Sarfati, what exactly happens in those textbook examples of antibiotic resistance, and why doesn't it uphold Darwinian evolution?
Well, like I say, it's a scam. Because if the bacteria that become resistant to the antibiotics, they remain bacteria, they don't change, they are still bacteria. Now, if that bacteria, but like I say, in the past, evolution was defined as the change in species. So if those bacteria develop limbs and started walking, then you have evolution, okay? But the bacteria remain bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotic. That is adaptation. Organisms are designed to adapt. A designer, a creator like God, would obviously put systems in place so that organisms can survive if the weather conditions change, if and various things in the environment change. So that is not they're calling that evolution now. That is the pitch, my Dr. Satafari, I hope I have the name right. He is Australian. So he knows that if you're playing cricket and you have spinners. You produce a particular pitch for your spinners, and if you have pace bowlers, you produce a pitch for your pace bowlers. Well, they are putting that as evolution in the textbook. It's adaptation. If the bacteria develop limbs, oh, then you have evolution. But you will never see that. And they know you will never see that. So they wouldn't call it, they would no longer call it adaptation. They're going to say it's evolution. It's a scam.
Okay, thank you so much. And Kelsey had continued her question, which Dr. Sarfati also placed his own answer there about grafting and seedless grapes. What was mentioned is that there is a loss of information. So with all of these, you have also these cave-dwelling fish that lost their sight. And so when you see these examples of evolution in action, it's actually going in the opposite way than we would expect. They're actually losing some capability, even if at least losing some information that might be beneficial, but there is an information loss from mutation. And you cannot have information loss to propel a species to turn into another type.
That's right. I can give you another example. Chicken, for example, have the genes for teeth. Okay, but those genes are suppressed because, you know, living organisms are information technology, the quintessential information technology entity. So the genes for teeth in chickens are suppressed. If something happened one day and the gene was, let us say a mutation occurred, and the gene that was suppressing the production of teeth was removed or damaged, and the chicken started growing teeth. That is not evolution, you know. That is gene expression, because as we say, living organisms have all sorts of control mechanisms. We have the genes for tails, okay, but we just don't produce tails, etc. And so evolution, for evolution to occur, it must produce new information to produce a new organ, information that was not there before. And there is absolutely zero scientifically verified evidence that such a thing can occur or has occurred. Nobody has documented that in the scientific literature.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. West. I see another comment. Ms. Erica Campbell says the redefinition is co-joined to an original understanding, and an example is homophobia. So I think this was speaking about the same issue about bait and switch, with evolution being used as a term to describe something that is not the molecules to man from a slime larger scale. Right. So is there any other question for Dr. West? That, okay, I see a hand. Let me see his hand. Eric, yes. Ms. Campbell, you may, yeah.
Right. I had started off by saying they're redefined terms, and then it becomes the accepted understanding. And then I went on to say that redefinition is then joined to the original understanding, and an example is homophobia. So I heard a discussion some time ago about what homophobia means, and it basically doesn't carry the technical sense of phobia, right? But then in terms of how they present it, it does incorporate it in what they want people to believe that Christians, for example, express towards homosexuals. You understand what I'm saying? So they twist words in a way that actually make it mean something it doesn't mean, and then the understanding in people's mind is still related to what it originally meant, so that you get this people start to view you in a particular way because that term is ascribed to you. I don't know if
You've made yourself absolutely clear. That is exactly what is happening. The people are, it's the same spirit, it's of the devil. And it's about lying. Okay, so they have lied about it. They lie about what being homophobic means. They lied about what a phobia is, which is defined in medicine. And in fact, the term was coined, homophobia, was coined by a psychiatrist, a psychologist, I think it is, to produce just that effect, to say that those who do not support homosexuality have a phobia, a mental illness. So it is a lie. The same thing, and it's the same strategy. Evolution is supposed to be the creation of new species by having new organs and new body plans being formed. Well, they can't find that. It's not in the scientific literature. So evolution has now become any change in alleles, any change in the genetic makeup. Whereas that could just be adaptation. The essence of evolution, and we must keep their feet to the fire, show us the evidence that you can get a new organ or a new body plan by some natural process. They cannot provide that evidence. It is not there.
All right, thank you so much. We are now halfway, and Dr. West, we really appreciate your presentation. You went into so much depth, and we will make the presentation also available to our private cohort of mentees. So we thank you again for your time and also for being a resident mentor. So, all right before we go into with Prof. Armitage, we're going to just briefly break here and invite you, if you have not yet subscribed to Chosen to Glow Ministries YouTube channel, you can go and search Chosen to Glow Ministries on YouTube and subscribe so that other persons will be able to view our videos and the truth can be reached to a wider audience. Thank you so much. And also JCHS Rebuilding the Wall, our Facebook group is open. So please do also visit to see the content that is posted there. There are devotionals that are posted quite frequently that can also help you in your spiritual growth. All right, so going back on track now, our second presentation, we hope that you are excited because it is one of the most, like the earliest oppositions that are fed to our children. We have some dinosaur fans in the audience. I saw David, Gordon, I think his brother might be there as well, Caleb, who are big dinosaur fans. Many of us are taught from very young about dinosaurs, and we're fascinated about these creatures that we have not seen. We're taught that they died like 65 million years ago. And then persons will ask, the Bible didn't talk about dinosaurs. Could it be really that because the Bible just speaks about the creation in 6 days and we don't see dinosaurs? So to discuss all of his findings about dinosaurs, especially for the benefit of our students here, we do have an expert in dino tissue, and I will be giving you a brief biography of Professor Armitage here. So hopefully you're seeing my screen. So Dr. Mark Armitage, he earned his bachelor's degree and later his doctorate degree in education from Liberty University in Lynchburg, and his master's degree in parasitology from the ICR Graduate School in San Diego, California. And Dr. Mark learned electron microscopy and soft tissue processing from Dr. Richard Lumsden, who was the past dean of the graduate school at Tulane University. So Dr. Mark's scientific work in microscopy has appeared on the covers of 20 journals, including new parasite host records in estuary fish, snails, and birds. Dr. Mark has published his findings of dinosaur soft tissue since his discovery of soft fibrillar bone in a Triceratops horn while in the Hill Creek Formation in 2012. His recent discovery of intact peripheral nerves in a Triceratops condyle from the Hill Creek was awarded the March 2021 cover of Microscopy Today. For those who are in publications, you know, when your research is at the cover of a journal, it's a big deal. All right. So in January 2023, Dr. Mark announced another world first. Fresh-looking nerve fibers from a Permian specimen thought to be nearly 300 million years in age. He's finding nerve fibers in what these evolutionists thought was 300 million years old. Okay, so part of his background, he has taught at the college level, ran microscopy labs for 12 years at 3 universities in Southern California, Masters University, Azusa Pacific University, and California State University, Northridge. In 2013, Dr. Mark published his world first findings of soft tissue from a Triceratops horn and was terminated from the university. Wow. So that is an experience. But he won the wrongful termination action against the California Board of Regents in 2016, and I'm grateful about that. Dr. Mark served on the board of South California Society for Microscopy and Microanalysis for 15 years as president, treasurer, and vendor relations secretary. Dr. Mark has worked as a microscopist for Carl Zeiss, Olympus, America, and Reichert. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this right. If not, sorry about that. Over a 43-year career in microscopy. He is currently senior microscopist at the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute headquartered in Mansfield, Texas. What's this? That is Prof. Armitage's biography, and we now welcome him to share his presentation with us. We are so very happy that you were able to join us, Prof. And we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you so much, Dr. Buckland, for the invitation. And yeah, I hope it's interesting for everybody. Let's try to share a screen here and see if this works. Generally, what we do is we simply present our science. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today, is just present two of the papers that were recently published. We do have, I can't show you all the work, but it is all available on our website, distri.org. So if you want further information on this presentation or any of our publications, really, simply go to distri.org. Our website has everything there, and I'll talk a little bit about more about that in a second. But these are latest publications. I thought to bring you up to date on some of the actual work would be the best thing. And as you can tell by the picture, I've been playing with microscopes for quite some time. I had a really fun career in microscopy. I would recommend it to anyone who has a degree in biology or chemistry or really any science degree. And it gave me the opportunity to really become a soft tissue processing expert. And so a lot of my career was learning how to process in laboratory for the professors all kinds of different soft tissue. And so when I started reading about the dinosaur soft tissue discoveries, I thought, wow, you know, I can do that. It all involves microscopy, and it all involves the processing of soft tissues, which astounded me. One of the things we learned in microscopy was that tissues break down so quickly that you have to do everything on ice. You do all your processing on ice. And so I was shocked to hear about the soft tissue and went on my first dig in 2012, and we'll share a little bit about that. But again, everything's free at distri.org. We don't sell anything. We give everything away for free. In fact, we have 3 books that you can download. Old Stretchy, the Dinosaur Bone Cell. We have 3 versions of this, and you can download these off the website. And they're made for kids in a way, but they've got a lot of science packed into them. So feel free to download those. The papers, all of our published papers are there, and some videos. There are also participation opportunities for folks who want to get involved with us as an organization. You can come on the digs. We just finished a dig in Montana. I think we had 20 volunteers come, and it was really awesome because we unearthed the complete Edmontosaurus skeleton. So I do want to say, by way of introduction, though, I grew up in the Caribbean. So it's great to be with friends from the Caribbean again. I was in Puerto Rico for 12 years and then moved to Florida, went to the University of Florida, but became a Christian in my junior year. My parents threw me out of the family, and so I had to start working, and thus started this career in microscopy. You see at that station right there, that was in the neurosurgery laboratory at Florida, University of Florida in Gainesville. So well, when we talk about dinosaur remains, we're really talking about their bones, because that's mostly what's left today are their bones. And so we're going to talk a little bit about compact bone. Here you see a long bone, like a humerus or a femur. And when I first started reading about dinosaur soft tissue, this is the kind of bone that researchers were going after, the long bones, because they're very encapsulated. And so, you would expect with this high degree of encapsulation and protection, there might be some soft tissue in the bone itself. And that, of course, proved to be the case. But when we went looking for long bones in 2012, we couldn't find any, but we found a Triceratops horn that was actually ripped away from the skull. And I have a piece of it here. This is the bottom of the horn, and this is about 12 pounds right here of solid bone. So when we think about these remains, we have to think about bone. And if we take a little section of this bone here and enlarge it, as this arrow shows, it looks like this. And you can see that there's quite a bit of architecture in the bone. This would be your bones or a dinosaur bone or any vertebrate that has bone in it. One of the things that we notice right away are these little holes in here and these circles around them. These are the bone canals. Here it is cut away on the front surface, and you can see that there are vessels in there. An enlargement of one of these little osteons is right here. It's called an osteon. And you see a lot of architecture in here. First of all, you see these little cells. Here's one here enlarged. We find a lot of cells in these bones. These are called osteocytes. We're not going to talk much about those today, but we're going to talk about the blood in the bones and also the nerves. Where would those things be? Well, then the nerves also travel with the vein and the artery in this canal. You see the canals down here and this one enlarged. Whoops, sorry. I need to go back one. And so that's where we would find the nerves if we look in these canals. You can also see a yellow structure here in this cutaway of the canal. So we are finding nerves. You'll see that in a second. But the most important thing is the blood, we believe, is still there. And so if we want to look for nerves, we would look in the bone in the canal. If we wanted to find blood, we would look in the bone in the canal. And so we do what's called thin sectioning. We take things like this big piece of bone and we thin section a piece of it. And what you're looking at here is actually a thin section of the Triceratops horn. And you see all these white spaces in there. Well, these are all the bone canals, all these white spaces. So they don't look nice and round because when an animal ages, these canals get reworked by the cells that I showed you that are living in there. These cells go in and actually rework these canals so they don't look nice and round. Here's a nice round one inside of this box here, and we're going to enlarge that one in a second. But this is what the bone looks like when we thin section it. And you notice that it's kind of discolored. It's not white as our bone would look like if we thin sectioned it. It's turned kind of brown. It kind of toasts over time in the ground. And the question is, how long has it been there, class? I mean, that's what we're trying to determine, isn't it? How long these have been in the ground, but they've been in there long enough for these bones to kind of darken a little bit. But you also see all of this very dark material in here. And that really challenged us when we started seeing it. We've seen it in the literature in other bones, and most people call this infill or sediment, the matrix, they call it, the dirt around the bones, they figure infiltrated into the bone. But we're finding exactly the opposite of that, as you'll see. So this is what a typical thin section looks like. And we make a lot of thin sections of these bones and we examine them under microscope. So let's enlarge this little box right here. And you can see now, here's the canal, and we have this very dark stuff in here. And one of the most important things to realize is that most of the bones that we dig out of the ground are bone. They haven't turned into rock, but this is promulgated that they are rock very frequently in paleontology and in geology. They call all of these bones rock, but they have not permineralized. They're fossils because they are in the ground and they were taken out of the ground, but they're still bone. In fact, we can use the same hospital protocol, and Dr. West may be familiar with this. It's called decalcification. It's done in hospital laboratories all over the world, where if you're in the operating room and they take a piece of your bone for analysis, maybe you have some pathology, they use a process called decalcification. And we're using that exact same process that the hospitals use to literally deconstruct these bones or dissolve them in the Petri dish. So it's really important to understand that most of these are still bone and not rock. They have not permineralized. It's very rare that we find permineralized bones. To date, we've been on something like 10 digs. We've dug in the Permian and in the Cretaceous and also the Jurassic in several places across the United States. And the Cretaceous is a layer that actually extends around the world. So we're hoping to dig that whole layer around the world and retrieve these bones from there. And I think we're going to find the same thing that we've been finding in the United States. But we're finding this blood, and we're calling this blood. We're calling this dark patch, which is adhering to the inner part of the canal very tightly, a blood clot. We don't think that this is dirt that came in from the surrounding soil. And we use a special microscope called a UV microscope because iron will react to UV light. And so under regular bright field, it looks like this. And you can see structure in here. You can see the cells that you saw in the diagram. You see another canal going down here, and you see little lines in here. Those are lines of growth in the bone. But when we go to UV, you see a completely different image. And that's because the UV light is so strong that when it irradiates the iron, this blue layer here, that glows. It gives off this characteristic light, which proves that it's iron. So that much iron couldn't come in from the ground and be concentrated inside this clot. So we think this is the remains of iron from the hemoglobin in the bone. Now you also see some other glowing things. Here's a glowing green structure inside of this round iron structure here. And you also see green over here. All of this green, we believe, is the proteins. The proteins that are still in this clot are also autofluorescing. Now, there's a biblical analog to this. When you may have remembered reading about Moses when he went up on the mountain to be with God. And then after some period of time, he came down back to the Israelites, and they said, Moses, cover your face, put on a shield or something to block your face, because he was irradiating, he was giving off light. And so all tissue will do this, all proteins will give off light, and a lot of minerals, for example, this iron. And so we have published now, I think, 5 different papers on clots collected from different organisms. And today you're going to see one called Nanotyrannus. All of these dinosaurs and even some of the Permian early tetrapods, supposedly early four-legged animals that were the first to show up on the earth. So this UV autofluorescence is a new technique that we've developed, and we're finding clots in just about everything we thin section. And we notice in the literature that all of their pictures look clotted too. And so our challenge to a lot of our colleagues is to simply examine your thin sections. You already have them. Examine them under a UV microscope and see if that shows the same thing that we found. So we're calling these blood clots. That's our interpretation of what these are. And we're attesting that we found this in Triceratops, not only the horn, but also the frill, which is the big plate of bone that comes off the skull in the back. That's called the frill. Also vertebra and ribs, and even the condyle. The condyle is a softball shaped bone that sits at the base of the skull. So the Triceratops could manipulate his skull on that round. It's like a trailer hitch, really. And so many different specimens of Triceratops. That's Cretaceous. Camarasaurus, which is a Jurassic animal. These pictures are actually from Camarasaurus. And that's supposed to be, I think, 115 million years old. And then Permian, Dimetrodon, that's the sailback lizard that you've seen, and Cacops and Eriops, these are other reptile-like tetrapods. These are supposedly 290 million years old. We're finding beautiful clots in these. And so all of these papers, as I said, are on our website, distri.org, and you can download those. And we find that We don't argue a whole lot with people because we feel that the science really does the trick. And so if you have scientists in your sphere of influence, it'd be great to download the papers and just hand them the papers, because this is published science. This is peer-reviewed, published science, published by Cambridge University Press. So we just let the science speak for itself. Tonight, you're going to hear a little bit about Nanotyrannus. And this is a controversial dinosaur because, and that's why we chose it. That's why we went after it, because it is fairly controversial. Some people think it's just a pygmy T-Rex that never really developed fully, but a whole group of other scientists recognize it as a whole new species, a new genera and new species. So we went after that because it is controversial. And so all of our papers are getting a lot of reads. Edmontosaurus, this is in press now. That means that the journal has the paper and they're going through peer review, and they'll send it back to us for any corrections they'd like to see or additional work, but that should be published pretty soon. So that's our interpretation. We're finding clots, and we've shown this over and over again, but here's the Nanotyrannus paper. So Nanotyrannus was the picture that I showed you at the very beginning of the talk. He's built a little different from T-Rex. His teeth are double serrated. So it's like a steak knife on both sides. It can cut you one way and then the other way as well. So their teeth are highly diagnostic. So when you find the teeth at your dig, you know you're digging with Nanotyrannus. And so we went to Montana. We collected many different pieces of this skeleton. Here's a radius. This is a limb bone. It's a very delicate bone. And here now are the thin sections. So we thin section this bone. We put it under a regular microscope and photograph a canal. This is a bone canal. And look how filled it is with this blood clot that we contend. And so when we hit it with the UV, you can see how the UV says, yeah, I'm here. I'm still here. So that's a radius. That was positive for clots. This is a digit on their hands, their manus. They have digits in there. And so we collected one of these little digits and thin sectioned it, and it was positive for clots in the center here. You can see that. You can also see all the cells surrounding this canal. So we try to take photographs that the paleontologists and the bone folks will recognize when they see this architecture. So that phalanx was positive. We call this a postcranial element because we couldn't truly identify it. So anything postcranial is termed that way. We think this is a limb bone. It's a very massive bone. By the way, all these bones are in sand. You can literally just put a knife into the sand wall that you're digging in front of and pull it towards you, and all these things fall out or they show themselves right away. So they're very easy to collect. But here you can see beautiful clots in here. The iron's still reacting to the UV light. So that's a limb bone. Here's again, we call this postcranial vertebra because we couldn't place it exactly, but we believe this is a tail vertebra. And it's really rounded. You can see how a lot of the bones in this dig are rounded as if they tumbled through the mud as it was being carried, we believe, under the water. And so we thin sectioned this, and you see a massive clot in here, very beautiful clot. So over and over and over again, we're finding in these bones that are not bone, they're not rock, they're still bone, to yield these clots. What's astounding for us is that we have to grind these things to make thin sections. You can't just cut it with a knife. You take out a piece of bone and you glue it to a piece of glass, and then you just start grinding it down on a spinning diamond wheel. And so there's a lot of vibration in here. Plus we did all the tissue processing before we actually thin section these. So we put them in a fixative, which we call formalin. We wash it and then dehydrate it. And then we infiltrate it with a liquid plastic and harden that. And so it's a big process that goes on, including a lot of vibration. So we're shocked to see that these clots are still there and still adhering very tightly to the canal wall. And notice that they don't bleed out into the bone. in none of these pictures do you see these clots bleeding out into the bone. One of the theories is that this soft tissue is being preserved because they say of the blood that was in the canal, and that went out into the bone and preserved everything. But as you can see here, we're showing that's not the case. This blood never left the canal. It all clotted in place and it never left, and we cannot dislodge it even with all the vibration that we do in processing these. So that's another limb bone, Nanotyrannus ulna. Here's a claw. As I said, sometimes you put your knife into the sand and pull it towards you, and claws will actually fall out. So if you want to participate, come here in the spring and you'll be able to find claws. But this one's also positive for clots. One of the other things we've noticed, and I don't know if you can see it here, it's another indication that this is a metal, is that the polishing marks are preserved in the metal. So as we polish these things and make them thinner, you can see the grinding and polishing marks in the metal. So this claw was also positive. However, the tooth that we found, and this is a Nanotyrannus tooth, it's double serrated, has a serrated edge here and another serrated edge here. This was negative for clots, which is not unusual because when you pull a tooth out, you notice that it's only connected to one little connection point. So there's not a lot of blood supply into the teeth. So that was to be expected. But the one thing that I didn't show you or talk about, I did show it to you, is this clot right here. And I want you to note this structure. It's sort of an oval little structure. That's going to be important as we go along. And so we moved on here to to Edmontosaurus. And so this is brand new. These have very bright clots, and you can see how the UV really makes that show up. So it's a really important test that we've developed. It's one that we're publishing repeatedly over and over, and we're hopeful that our colleagues will employ this as well in their laboratories and check to see whether they have clots in their bones. So, okay, so the question is, so what? What's the big deal with the clots? Well, when you drown, your blood clots. There are drowning victims every summer and spring. I remember when I lived in the Caribbean and was in the water all the time, there were constantly people were dying and drowning, and I didn't give a thought about their blood, but there's a condition in medicine called disseminated intravascular coagulation. And so when you drown, if they can rescue you and bring you to the emergency room and resuscitate you with CPR, your heart starts pumping again, you start breathing. But that blood clot, no more clotting is going to take place because it's a one-way cascade reaction. So all of the reagents that you have necessary for clotting are used up in your drowning, and your blood is completely clotted. But if they resuscitate you in the ER, that clotting cascade is reversed. And so now, instead of clotting, because you have none of the factors to allow any clotting, you're bleeding out. And so the emergency room physician is trying to save you from bleeding to death. And so this is a known condition. There's another term, hypercoagulopathy. We noticed that as a result of COVID, many of the patients who died from COVID, and they literally drowned in their own pulmonary fluids, they're full of clots. And so that's a verification that this is a real thing. So when these organisms died, we know how they died. They drowned because their bones are completely clotted. And we're hoping to go up to a bed in Alaska called the Liscombe bone bed, where everything's in permafrost. All these bones that were buried there are in permafrost. And so we're hoping to be able to go there and find even better structures if we can dig up there. Now, this is what was published also in that paper. And this is not a photograph of Nanotyrannus. This is a clot from Triceratops, but you notice this structure in here. Well, that's a nematode. That's a roundworm. It's a soil worm. And if you look at this carefully, and you can enlarge this, if you download the paper from our website, you can actually enlarge this, and you can see all this structure in here. Now, if this was there when the animal died, which is what some of our colleagues suggest, this soft-bodied organism would not be there anymore. But because we put our bones in a fixative at the dig, as soon as we take them out of the ground, we put them in this formalin, and that sort of freezes all the architecture, including these worms that are in there feeding. So this was a living worm when we put this bone into fixative. And of course, here it is in this picture I showed you in Nanotyrannus. So we have found these nematodes now, not only in Nanotyrannus and not only in Triceratops, but in Edmontosaurus and in several other dinosaurs. So right now we're preparing a comprehensive paper to present at the Microscopy Society of America meeting in July in Minneapolis of an overview of all the organisms that we found clots in. But nematodes, this is another very important area that we're trying to get a handle on. Now, you remember this picture? I showed you this picture before, and I don't know if you can see, but there's 23 nematodes, if you take the time to count them, in all of these bone canals inside of this bone. So what is attracting these nematodes into the bone? We know they were alive at the time we took the bone out of the ground because we can see their ultrastructure. So why are they there? Are they on a camping trip? Or are they on vacation? No, they're there because there's food in there, and these are voracious organisms. They're even cannibalistic. They will eat each other if there's no food. So we believe that these are being attracted into the bone because of the clots and the proteins that are still in there. And we think they're feeding off of these, and they're making young. You can see a lot of juvenile worms inside of these bones as well. So it's not just the big adults. There are juveniles in here as well. So that's another world first discovery, which we're interested in really expanding on. And here's what they look like in life. Here they are stained with a fluorescent stain, but you can see they're juveniles. They're very small compared to the adults. And so again, we found this in Nanotyrannus, in Triceratops. Here's one that we found in a decal solution. So when we put these in that weak acid and the bone starts to deconstruct, here a worm now fell out, and we pipetted that onto a slide also. So we think this is a really exciting new area of research. We're actually trying to figure out how to coax these living worms out of the bones and into, say, a blood auger or something that could support them. So that would be, can you imagine if we got video of these worms crawling out of a dinosaur bone? I thought that'd be pretty cool. So that's what we're working on. So that's the first paper that represents a lot of the work that we've done in clots to date. Again, you can go download all the rest of the papers off the website. This is a nerve paper. This was just published in January of this year. And this has to do with an organism called Cacops. He's only about 6 or 7 inches long. Again, they call him an early tetrapod, early 4-legged creature that supposedly came out of the water and found a way to thrive on land. And so we went after this element, this organism, because it is so old. This is tremendously old, according to the evolutionary paradigm, some 290, 300 million years old. And these are found in a very interesting location. There is a site in Germany, and I think another one in Europe, but Richard Spur, Oklahoma, seems to be the center for these kinds of organisms. And we developed a relationship with the Oklahoma Museum of Natural History, and they literally opened their drawers up to us. And so we processed a bunch of these bones, and we found what we believe are nerve filaments. So, but first we had to do our homework. We had to go into the publication, into the literature, and to study the diagnostic features of nerves, because just like teeth, the Nanotyrannus tooth that has those 2 serrations on it, these have a very interesting diagnostic pattern. It's reminiscent of that DNA molecule that Dr. West showed earlier, but these are the collagen wrappings that go around the nerve, and they're crosshatch pattern. And so this was a diagram presented in 1943. This was a microscopist who used polarized light to tease this out. And so once we learned how to recognize this in the fibers that we were finding, we were able to say, yes, we're finding nerves. And as Dr. Buckland mentioned earlier, we did get the cover of the journal for the nerve that we found in Triceratops, and we compared it to a chicken nerve. So this is a really great article that you might want to download and share with your friends, because it shows we used chicken avian nerve as a model. And when we went to look in the Triceratops decalcification slides, we found the exact same pattern. So we had to learn how to find that by going into the literature. And so here's that avian nerve. You can see that crosshatch pattern in here. So what I did is I took a chicken bone and I fixed it. I put it in fixative and I went through the whole soft tissue process. And then we decalcified it in that weak acid. And these peripheral nerves came out of the bone canals. These are very tiny. These are on the order of about 15 microns in diameter. A human hair would be 100 microns in diameter. So these are really tiny peripheral nerves. And here it is from the Triceratops with the exact same diagnostic feature on the surface. This is called epineurium, perineurium. These are neurological terms for these tissues, but there it is in Triceratops. So here are these K-Cops limb bones. They're very small, as you can see. This is in centimeters. So these are small bones. And we decalcified these. These were from the Sam Noble, Oklahoma Museum of Natural History. And this is what we found. We found entire clumps of nerves in some cases, large clumps of nerves that we were able to stain. We put this in osmium, which is a very strong stain. Here's another one that shows this beautiful crosshatch pattern. Another one here with the crosshatch pattern. And I don't know if you can see these little globules here. Here's a big one down here, but these little tiny globules, and this is all published, of course, those are lipids. So we're finding lipids in these nerves still, which is astonishing. I mean, imagine taking a bottle of Wesson oil and just pouring that out on your backyard and come back in 5 years. How much Wesson oil would you expect to find? We wouldn't expect to find any, but these things are full of these lipids. Some of the internal structure of epineurium and perineurium is so well preserved that it's astonishing. It's even better than some of the Cretaceous specimens. And so the question is how? How can this be preserved if this is orders of magnitude older than the dinosaurs we're pulling out of the Cretaceous? So, like I say, all of this has been published. It's kind of been greeted with stunned silence. Here I have two red arrows pointing to lipids that I squeezed out. Notice that the lipids are gray. When you put biological tissues into osmium tetroxide, the lipid gets stained a gray color. And so I can press on these when I put them under very high magnification so that my lens actually touches the top of the slide. When I focus up and down, I'm actually squeezing, putting pressure on the slide. And so with that pressure, I was able to exude out some of these lipids. You can see those here. Here's another one where I took the nerve and I squeezed it really hard with a fine needle forceps. And you can see a whole trail of lipid bubbles coming straight up. It's a little hard to see on the presentation here, but when you look at this in the microscope, you can see a whole trail of bubbles coming up out of that nerve. So how can this be there? How can these lipids be still in these structures that are supposed to be that old? So come on a dig, collect teeth, collect claws. Maybe you'll find nerves in some of the structures that you find. And one of the things that we're doing that's very exciting is we do hands-on laboratories. We take out 20 microscopes to a school and we set up and we have hundreds of specimens, hundreds of slides that we made that are permanent slides. We have permanent nerve slides, permanent cell slides. And so we can put those under the microscope and these students can actually find them themselves. In fact, we bring bone juice to the lab and I will pipette out bone juice onto slides and give those to the students, and they run to their microscope and look at the specimen, and they find nerves and cells themselves. So you can come on a dig, you can get involved in the research, you can participate in a lab. There's a lot of things that you can do, but certainly check out our website and feel free to support us if you can. We really don't ask for help. We let the Lord provide it, and so far He's done a great job. We've done 39 of these laboratories around the country so far, and that's just in a year and a half. So we're really excited about that work. So I'll throw it open to Q&A now. If you've got any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
Wow. Thank you so very much, Prof. Mark. I am in awe of the things that you've just mentioned. We're going to be opening out for question and answers. And as I mentioned, we do have some young fans of dinosaurs. I don't know if they're ready or if their mom if they are ready to ask questions, but when they are, you can feel free to open your mic and ask any questions that you want of Prof. Mark. I shared the cartoon stories that you have on your site with them, so I think it must be fascinating for them to also be meeting the author of the books they're reading too. So please don't be shy. I see a
I'm
hand
trying to
up.
raise my hand, but I can't seem to do it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Dr. West. Go ahead.
Professor Armitage, did I pronounce your name properly?
Yes, it's fine.
So what do the scientific evolutionary biologist communities say about the things you're finding? What do they say?
You know, we have adopted a very collegial approach. We're looking for collaboration, cooperation. And so many of them are quiet about it. Some of them have openly expressed shock. One of the things we're trying to do is build a repository, a library that folks can check specimens out and look at them in their own labs. But we have collaborations, interestingly, with forensic scientists who are intimately aware of how bodies decay and how soft tissue is supposed to last. And so it's really exciting to have these collaborations, and hopefully they'll turn into good partnerships. But some people are stunned. Some people jump up and down and say, wow, this is so cool. I need to learn more about it. Other people are just quiet, but we don't go out and really argue. Like I said, we simply present the science, and we seem to be able to build bridges with that. So that's, to me, is so exciting to build these cooperative bridges.
It's very good to hear. What I wanted to find out, because from reading, I had heard that it was actually an evolutionist who first found they discovered the soft tissues, Mary Schweitzer, Dr. Schweitzer. So it's not something that was found from someone who already had that type of worldview or interpretation framework of science. And so it's quite interesting that it was actually an evolutionist who was the first to find it, and then it was difficult for her to publish it. I don't know if you have a comment, and then we have a few people commented in the chat and also raised their hands.
Well, let me just say that Dr. Schweitzer did a fabulous job. Her science really painted them in a corner, because she proved beyond a doubt that the tissues that she was discussing are endogenous to the tissue. They go back to the dinosaur. They go back to the original organism. So she showed that without a doubt. And then they realized we have no mechanism for how these things are still here. And they came up with the iron preservation mechanism, which really doesn't answer the problem. But most people don't realize that it was actually Roman Pawlicki, who is in Poland. He's still alive. He's the first one that started publishing on dinosaur soft tissues way back in the 60s. And so this has been in the literature since the 1960s, and nobody's really followed up on it until Dr. Schweitzer did. She came upon it by happenstance. She had been working in the same place that we dig in the Hell Creek Formation. In fact, I think we dig about 2 miles away from where they dig, same formation. But she had to send some specimens back to her lab, and she did the decalcification when she got back, and she was astonished. She and her tech were astonished. They repeated the experiment over a dozen times to make sure that they were really finding what they thought they were. So, but she wasn't the first. She's actually come in the footsteps of Dr. Pawlicki.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. Before I get to the others, I really didn't want to lose the connection for our theme. And I noted some things you mentioned that about the droning, the link with droning, and the link with the specimens being found in sand, like sandstone, sedimentary rocks. And then I think back to the account of what Genesis had said about the global flood, and reading that sandstone and sedimentary rock layers are all across the globe. Have you found full or have you found any evidence other than the clots? For example, the positionality of where the head thrown back, like asphyxiation cues in your digging, or have you can you verify that there are other clues that would have shown that there was probably a big event that caused a mass destruction of the dinosaurs around the globe?
I think there's several factors. Number one, the death pose that you talk about, where the head and neck are bent back against the body, that's common. We have not found a lot of complete organisms. We find mostly in the Hell Creek, it looks like it was a reworked area. So it may have been uplifted and reworked, but when it was deposited, it was probably deposited under about 500 feet of water in these huge underwater mud flows that travel along the bottom in these currents. And so a lot of things are disarticulated, which means their bones are not positioned the way they would be if they had just fallen over and died. And that's the typical explanation that scientists give, is these dinosaurs just kind of fell over and died. Well, there's a condition in the blood when you do fall over and die, your blood drains to the decumbent or lower part of your body. So we're in the process now of we took bones in a vertical column from the vertebral column all the way down through the rib cage, and we're going to look for absence of clots up top. If they fell over and the blood drained, you should have absence of clots up top and heavy presence of clots down below. So that's one experiment that we're looking forward to doing soon. But most of them look like they were ripped apart, torn apart, limbs torn apart and left just isolated. We find a lot of different pieces of organisms in the same sand that we pull these dinosaurs out of. We find a lot of turtle, crocodile, alligator, stuff like that. Plant material, a lot of coal, a lot of blackened plant material that is powder. You can literally push it to powder. Strong smells emanate from these. When you take them out and open them up, you smell the decaying smell, or in the case of some of the plant material, you smell very strong pine smell. And flies actually come and land on that right away as soon as you open it. So it's really trippy what we find out there. But most of it looks like it went through a cement mixer, all mixed up and ground up and rounded. But rarely we did just complete an entire Edmontosaurus skeleton, but it looked like it was folded up and then plopped down on itself. So the head and everything, the rib cage, it's all distended and pulled apart like it was in this rushing water, and then finally ended up in a position where it was covered. So it really looks chaotic.
Oh, that's so interesting to just see what you see in the field and then read what you read in Genesis about the global flood. So that's very much interesting to see experiments to test that as well. So let's go to the persons who have their hands up. I see my father, Mr. Buckland, up, and Melissa Hall, and anyone else, feel free to raise your hand as well. Can unmute now.
I would like to ask, how long does it take blood to disintegrate and disappear from a bone? And would this provide a clue as to how long the dinosaurs became extinct or died out?
Right. Well, forensic scientists have looked at this, and typically, if the blood is not clotted, all of this is predated upon. There are microbes, bacteria, insects, protists, rodents. When we first found the Triceratops horn, we sent a piece in for what they call a blast DNA analysis. And I think the DNA of 30 different organisms showed up. So you have intense predation going on. Some of these bones, depending on where they are and how well they're sequestered, are picked clean. So you can find Nanotyrannus up high on a hill, and these bones might be completely stripped of anything. And then just a few feet below, they're full of tissue. So the environmental factors are important. What's in the ground trying to predate them. There's also the freeze-thaw cycle. Every winter, Montana goes into a hard freeze, and then that thaws. That's very hard on tissues and remains in the ground. To me, it's astonishing that anything is still there. And based on my training in soft tissue processing, I don't see how these can be over 500 years old just based on my training. And so for them to be in the ground for how long, class? That's the question. 1,000 years or 6,000 years or 10,000 years, to me, is simply astonishing, because I know how quickly these kind of tissues break down and go away. In fact, cells, they're basically surrounded by fat, that phospholipid membrane, and that stuff doesn't sit around in the soil for very long. So, God kind of bragged in Job, I think it was 40 or 41, didn't he? Where he said, are their bones not like brass, and are they not like iron? Well, apparently they're full of iron, because all of the blood is clotted there. But just pool the blood, you look in the forensic literature, and that stuff doesn't last at all. If it's in a shallow grave or even at the soil surface, maybe 6 months, 8 months, a year, all of that soft tissue should be gone, certainly by 10 years or 50 years or 100 years. So I'm just astonished that we keep finding this level of preservation, including nerves with lipids in them. I mean, that's just, to me, it's incomprehensible. So I call these impossible pictures a lot of times, because they shouldn't be there.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for your answer. So Melissa, you may unmute now.
Hi, good night, everyone. All right, so I have a lot of questions, but I'll just ask a few. So I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 80s, and for perhaps the first 30 years of my life, I held on to the fact that dinosaurs did not exist, because I don't hear of a record of it in the Bible. And when we ask our pastors, they can't give an explanation. I think maybe within the past 10 years or so, I have actually accepted the fact that dinosaurs exist, because I'm hearing now from Christian scientists that are saying, yes, they did exist. But in terms of the record, the biblical record, sorry, I have two young ones with me. In terms of the biblical record, what is the support for the existence of dinosaurs? That's one question. Another question is, why weren't they in the ark? Were they created by God? My mother is 100% believing that dinosaurs were genetically modified organisms, and that's the reason that they weren't in the ark. But so there's just those thoughts in my head, those two main things. If you can speak to that in terms of the biblical record of dinosaurs, and why weren't they in the ark?
Right. Great questions. I think in terms of the biblical record, the book of Job, I think, is really the only one that refers to them in God's soliloquy to Job. But they're certainly in a lot of folklore. A lot of people groups around the world have recorded these dragons, or whatever term they use for them, in their folklore. They put them in art. They put them on walls, on building walls. Stegosaurus on the side of a temple in Thailand. I mean, how does that end up there if it wasn't part of that people group's culture and life? So, but as far as scripture, it really doesn't say a whole lot about dinosaurs. Were they on the ark? I mean, we do find dinosaurs in layers that are considered to be post-flood or towards the end of the flood. So maybe some of them were on the ark and got off and survived, but certainly the earth conditions must have been completely different after the flood than what they were used to, the types of vegetation that they were used to consuming. Maybe the barometric pressure changed dramatically in a way that did not support deep oxygenation of their tissues. So really all of it is armchair quarterbacking, I think, at this point. But the fact remains that they're in the ground. They're common. You walk through the Hell Creek Formation sometimes and you see horns just littered, Triceratops horn just littered around the landscape. So, and you find tons of bone shards. We collect bone shards because we give them away in our hands-on labs, and we'll come back with a box, full of shards just from one little area. So this stuff is distributed everywhere in these locations, and they're found around the world. So, I mean, Edmontosaurus has been found all over the world. So even up in Alaska in this permafrost. So they must have been part of the biota. Whether or not the Bible, the Bible doesn't tell you to stop beating your grandparents, but you shouldn't be beating your grandparents. But so, I mean, it may not have addressed it specifically the way we might have preferred. I wish there was more in the Bible about dinosaurs, but it's not there. So a lot of this is just taken on faith as far as how they were made, how they fit into God's plan. I don't know. They seem like lethal creatures. That Nanotyrannus, they say, could run 65 miles an hour because he had a different hip structure from T-Rex. So that's why a lot of people think he's a different animal altogether. But no, they look particularly designed for killing and eating. So I don't know. I have a lot of questions for the Lord myself, but they definitely were part of the biota because they're buried all over the world. They probably all succumbed to the flood, just like all air-breathing, land-dwelling organisms did, like the Bible says. So there's a little bit of faith involved, but there's plenty of evidence to support the fact that they were alive and living, walking around for some period of time before the flood.
If I may, I think it's a very interesting question. And I don't have an answer, but I'm going to do a little bit of speculation because it's not an area that I've done a lot of research on. But I think that dinosaurs definitely existed. In terms of evolution, I know people often argue, have birds evolved from dinosaurs? I've heard that, and there's a back and forth on that. I often think of a bird without feathers that is 20 times as big, and the genes for teeth removed. I mean, the suppression, the genes for teeth expressed. And I'm sure they have genes for tail as well, I have a feeling. So what would that creature look like? Because although we often think of dinosaurs as reptiles, people are more and more beginning to think of dinosaurs as being feathered. In fact, some people think that T-Rex had feathers rather than it was not a reptile. It may have been some other, a warm-blooded creature. So I'm just postulating, that gene regulation, I don't know what the genome of a dinosaur is or what, I don't know if that has been analyzed, I don't know. But there definitely And also people have carried out experiments that show that the size that animals grew to can change according to the environment. So I'm just saying that picture a chicken with some genes that are now being suppressed and with less feathers and a tail. And it looked pretty much like a dinosaur to me. I'm just saying that that's just a reality. And again, I just want to repeat that there is now a consideration that dinosaurs were more feathered than really reptiles. And that's, there may be a linkage there.
Yeah, that's becoming a very popular area of paleontology, dinosaur paleontology. And to be honest, I haven't really studied that. I've concentrated more on my expertise, which is soft tissue. And like I say, we're finding things that no one else is reporting on. But the other thing is, some people say, well, maybe Satan created these organisms or modified them somehow. Satan has no creative powers. All he can do is sort of misuse what's already been created. So, but that's an area that I just say, Lord, I don't understand it. I give it to you. I lay it at your feet. I trust you for it. And I really don't spend a lot of time on it. I really want to concentrate while I can. And I have this energy and the ability to document this around the globe, because if we see this all around the globe, then we know that the flood was global. And so, that's really what we're going for. But a lot of the spiritual aspects of it, I haven't really spent a lot of time considering that. But I don't think Satan made them. I think, God is the creator, and he must have done this before the end of his creation week, because it says he rested on the seventh day from all his work. In fact, Exodus 20:11 says, thus all the creation was completed in all its vast array. And I take that on faith that God did it all and ended it when he did, and no creation happened after that. So it's a big mystery. It's a big question. I have a lot of questions for God myself when I get there. But right now, I think this is the most powerful evidence that we have to show that the flood was global and to show that these organisms are not that old. They did hard work. They worked really hard to promote their idea that dinosaurs are millions and millions of years old, deep time. They promoted all this deep time, and they didn't really do their homework properly, because now we're finding all this stuff that can't exist through deep time. There's no preservation mechanism for any of these structures. The blood that they say did the preserving never left the canals. And even if it did, naked iron in the body is destructive. It chews up tissues like Pac-Man. And so it's not a really good explanation for how this stuff is still here. I can't understand why it's still here, other than that God is preserving it for mankind to see in these last days. That's all I can figure.
Okay, I wanted to ask a question. So often science is prescient as to reality. That means that things that we used to see long ago, like Dick Tracy talking on his watch, now we're doing it. And so I wondered to what extent dinosaur DNA has been recaptured from like the cavities of bones or teeth and so on, and to what extent is a Jurassic Park scenario even remotely possible?
Yeah, I don't think Jurassic Park is, even if we found their DNA, and I don't think they're finding much. I think just some fragments have been found. They have found structures that are related to the DNA. For example, DNA, of course, is a very long molecule, and it gets wrapped up and wrapped up and wrapped up, and they present as these chromosomes. We're familiar with what chromosomes look like, but those are wrapped around these little structures called histones, and they have found the histones. So the mechanical architecture that's needed to control DNA for unraveling and decoding, that is still there in these cells. They found nuclei, they found histones and other proteins that are still in these cells and still react to, for example, common laboratory stains. I can stain these cells, I can stain these nerves. They take up biological stains just like my tissue would. So they're behaving in ways that are, in my mind, again, impossible if they're that old, or even more than 500 or 1,000 years old. If we hold that they're 6,000 to 10,000 years old, I cannot understand how they're still here and still behaving like tissues do. So it's astonishing to me.
Thank you so much for your responses. And Kelsey had asked a question, if you found any megalodon fossils, or if this is just in the movies.
Yeah, I have not. I imagine that we've walked over shark teeth and whatnot in our digs, because shark teeth are found in these deposits. But I'm just so focused on dinosaur that even if these things turn up, I just turn a blind eye to them. But I'm sure that these are found in these digs just as prominently as these dinosaur bones are.
Thank you so much. So as you would have seen, we're kind of out of time, but I'm asking the audience. I know that you're probably not even seeing the time because this is so exciting. We're gonna go until about 8:15 because I have a few more announcements and a few questions. And thanks again for your time, Prof. So just I wanted to go back, reconnecting to the ARC question, because some things that I've read in the past, one explanation was that dinosaurs have a growth spurt after adolescence, and so at a certain young age, it could be very plausible or feasible for young dinosaurs, a pair of young dinosaurs, to fit in the dimensions of the ark that is described in Genesis. Do you have any information about the genetic that to confirm that there is a possibility in terms of at least how we know or how we've hypothesized the growth sequence, I don't know the use of what word I should use, but of dinosaurs that could have could allow them to fit on the ark?
Yeah, I think it's possible that I've heard and I've read that some people have said that many dinosaurs are the size of a sheep or smaller. And so you could take juveniles, excuse me, certainly on the ark. But again, it's just not an area that I've studied. And as far as genetic material, maybe up in the permafrost and some of these frozen tissues, we might be able to find some DNA. But so far, my understanding that only small segments have been found. And so there's not enough information there to really decode it and see what genes are there, as far as my understanding.
Okay, all right. So thank you so much for that. I want to invite David Gordon and Caleb Gordon for you to unmute your mic. You have some questions in the chat. I know you might be shy, but I want you to ask your questions directly to Prof because I know you're very interested in this. So these are our youngest. These are our youngest mentees, 8 years old and 12. Can go ahead, David.
Did you find any dinosaur eggs?
I have not. Dinosaur eggs have been found, and actually they've done different kinds of image analysis from them, X-ray tomography and other things where they see the skeletons of the juvenile dinosaurs in the eggs. So that has definitely been found, but it's not an area that I've worked on.
Okay, thank you. And David, you had another question?
Did you find any dinosaur age turtles?
They have been found, but I have not found any myself.
Okay. All right. So Caleb and David, were you interested in the presentation? Did you learn anything new, or you have any other questions that you wanted to ask, Prof?
Well, I did learn some things new, but no questions.
No questions. All right. That means everything is clear. I'm so happy that you're able to follow. So what am I seeing here? Did I see something else? Wow. I'm gonna have to have a brief. We're gonna have to end soon. But another question: could dinosaurs have been vegetarian before they became carnivorous?
Yes, I think that many organisms were probably vegetarian before the fall. even though they seem to be designed to be meat eaters, I think that that was just part of God's design, knowing that they were going to be having to become scavengers or meat eaters later. But I'm sure that they were all vegetarian. The Bible says that every green plant was given to animals for food. And even you remember the story where Peter was on the roof of his house and the Lord lowered down a sheet with all kinds of unclean animals in them. And he said, "Take, Peter, kill and eat." And he was offended by that. But of course, the lesson he was trying to teach there was that the gospel is not just for the Jews, it's for all men, all people on the face of the earth. So, but I have to believe that because there was no death before sin, because if you have dinosaurs living for millions of years before Adam and Eve, you have all that death before sin. And the Bible teaches clearly that death entered the world through sin and through Adam and Eve. And so in my mind, there couldn't have been any predation, which would cause death. When you eat a plant, if you don't eat the whole thing, typically it can grow back. And so you're not really killing a plant by taking its fruit or even harvesting some of it to eat. And so that would hold to the principle that there was no death before sin. If you accept millions of years, you accept millions of deaths before the curse was placed on man. And if God said, "In the day you eat of it, Adam, you shall surely die," Adam would have said, "God, things are dying all around me. What? That's no big deal." So it really invalidates not only the curse, but the meaning of the cross, because Jesus had to come and pay the price because of that curse that was placed on us because of our sin. So accepting death before Adam and Eve and their sin really violates what the scripture teaches in terms of the redemption that we've been brought to because of the death of Christ.
That's an excellent answer. Thank you so much, David. Is it a hand up that you had before, or is it a new question?
A new question.
All right, quickly, please. Thank you.
Have you found any Kronosaurus, Mosasaurus, or Elasmosaurus bones?
Sadly, no, I've not. We've concentrated again mostly on the Cretaceous, and I believe some of those organisms predate the Cretaceous, but we're anxious to go to some of these other sites and dig in some of these supposedly older sediments. But so far, we've really been restricted to the Cretaceous dinosaurs, except for the Permian, which I already showed you, but none of those creatures, but I'm anxious to try to find them.
Yes, and Caleb also has his hand up again. Go ahead, Caleb.
Have you personally alone found a whole Triceratops skeleton?
As a matter of fact, Caleb, last year when we went to Montana to the Hell Creek, we were on the top of a mountain and we found two horns sticking up out of the dirt. They were sheared off. So they looked kind of like this, right? But sticking up out of the dirt. And so we dug part of that last year and uncovered a whole Triceratops skull. Then earlier this year, the folks who work at the dig site there year round told us, we think the whole skeleton is underneath that skull. So I think we have found an entire Triceratops skeleton, yes.
Wow. Wow. And again, can you tell our audience, if they want to learn more, supporting your ministry, purchasing any learning materials from you, and even joining you in one of your excavations, how can they find you to connect with you if they're more interested after this?
Yeah, great question. If they go to dstri.org, and that stands for Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute, dstri.org, we have a contact tab. So if you click on contact, you can send us a message and we can respond to you that way. So, but you can download everything we have for free. We don't sell anything, we give everything away. And so all that's free. So you can download everything off the website. There's videos also available. We actually have a YouTube channel, which has about 70 or 80 videos on it. But if you contact us through that distri.org, we can send you all that material.
Okay, thank you so much. And the same for Dr. West. I did not get to ask you for marketing and material. So if you have anything you wanted our audience to purchase, just telling our audience, these persons have volunteered their time. They didn't charge us anything. And so for them to continue their ministry, we would, if you are also interested in getting materials, you can just buy a book from them or something that they might want to.
No, I have nothing to market. The ministry I'm involved with, the Jamaica Coalition for Healthy Society, is an advocacy organization for the Judeo-Christian worldview. But I just want to make a point here. I'm not going to take it any further. But I think that we need a fundamental, a paradigm shift in our concept of time. That shift was made back in 1905 with Einstein's theory of special relativity. But it is not a part of it's not an aspect of the scientific community or of the Christian community, but it is the reality. It defines, Einstein theory tells us how we are to understand time. It's either Einstein is accurate or he's not. And it does not at all conflict with the scripture, but requires a fundamental change in the way we consider the world that we live in. And I think that if we start adopting that approach of understanding the world as a completed creation by a God who knows everything, a lot of the things that we find challenging will fall apart. But I won't bring it up here now because I know it requires a fundamental and a paradigm change in the way we think. And people often cannot do that because it's challenging.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. West. And I just wanted all of them, including Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, I want to thank you because you've been so active in the chat, answering questions, placing links in the chat. I want just your concluding remarks. How can we apply everything that we talked about today in our evangelistic efforts, or even talking to scientists as well, or no matter what part of evangelism, just to talk about God or introduce the idea of God to persons who might think science is an obstacle to faith?
Well, I will say that the books that we give away and you can download from our website, and you can print these off yourself, these are great witnessing tools because they're fun, they're positive, but they present the science in a way that's just unavoidable. So you really can't get around the facts that we're presenting. So feel free to download those books and give them away.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sarfati, anything you wanted to say? And we're going to have you and your full presentation July 13, God willing, when we're doing our other part of the science as well. So Dr. Sarfati, do you have anything you wanted to
Well, thank you. I hope I can share a lot more when I come back on July, that date. Yeah, but it's these sort of talks really to motivate you to go deeper, learn more, really absorb some of the information, be as deep as you can, and then you're in a position to answer people's objections, to share why it makes sense, that the biblical worldview makes sense and why the evolutionary one does not.
Yes, thank you so very much for everyone. So we've now come to near the end of our session for today, but now just one last item on our list is our exciting social media competition, where we are now going to recruit you to share what you've been learning in each of our sessions, where you will share on social media with your friends in 1 to 2 minutes. So let's show you the details. Are you hearing me? Let me reshare because I don't remember if I shared the audio.
Yes, I was hearing.
Okay. right, so there was a bit of a lag in the video. You probably didn't see the step 2 and step 3, but just to reiterate, we will be having 8 different weekly competitions. And yes, all right, so let's finish with the video. As you saw, our question for this week is, what evidence is there to believe that the book of Genesis in the Bible is scientifically trustworthy? We open entries today. So whatever social media, well, Facebook or WhatsApp in particular, please, if you go on Facebook, tag Chosen to Glow Ministries and put the hashtag Defend It Well. That is how we will actually see your entry. All right, so we'll be looking for the hashtags and everyone who uses that hashtag. Entries close next week, Tuesday, and Doctors West, through their JCHS or Issachar Foundation, have kindly sponsored a $5,000 gift certificate every week. That's Jamaican dollars for the winning entry for the week. All right, so please, this is also for your own practice, right? And you will be posting it publicly on social media to share the word of what you have learned with your friends. So this is a good opportunity, and I hope that you will take advantage of it. For those who are in our internal mentorship, it's also worth 10 points toward your certificate at the end. And finally, join us next week, God willing, next Thursday, where we will now look at the more fundamental question of God's existence. Is God a delusion? Can we really know that God exists and who he is? So we'll be having with us our Discovery Institute fellow, Dr. Jonathan McLatchie, who will be looking at intelligent design in nature. That's the first letter in our Defend It Well design. And then we will have Dr. Joe Booth, who will look at Christianity's claims comparatively with other cultural claims about God. And so please stay tuned. It's the same link, and we hope that you will be edified by it. Again, we would like to thank, very, very grateful for all of you, especially our speakers as well, Professor Armitage, Dr. West, and Dr. Sarfati, who came and joined us as well. And for everyone who has been tuning in and who will be tuning in, we pray that the information will help you further grow in your walk and at least make you ask some of the important questions to solidify your search for truth. All right, so do join us next week, same time, same place, and we wish you a good rest of your